Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sustainable Jersey's 2021 Sustainability Summit presentation, The Complete and Green Streets Doctor is In. I'm Megan McParlin, Program Coordinator at Sustainable Jersey, and I'm happy to welcome you here today. Before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping requests. As you'll note, we are recording today's session. This presentation and all other summit recordings will be posted on our website by next Friday, May 28th. We will begin with some presentations and ask you to keep your microphone on mute to avoid any background noise. After our presentations, there will be plenty of time for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat box, but we will hold most of them until the end. My colleague, Ann Heasley, will be monitoring the chat for your questions and ask the speaker to answer any clarifying questions. We are providing a live transcript of today's presentation, sometimes known as closed captioning. If you are not already seeing the transcript as I'm speaking, you will have to enable that option by clicking Live Transcript and then Enable Transcript. I also have a few announcements to share, all of which you can find for more details on our website. The first is that the municipal application deadline for the 2021 certification cycle is June 6th, and the final application for the schools is June 21st. We look forward to seeing your submissions. Sustainable Jersey is currently administering $75,000 of grants to fund municipal resiliency and environmental stewardship projects across the Atlantic City electric service area through ACE's Sustainable Communities Grant Program. For more information, please visit Sustainable Jersey's grants page. And now I'll turn it over to Ann Heasley, our Program Manager of Policy and Planning, to introduce our speakers.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Now, before I introduce the speakers, I'm just going to share the results of the poll because I think I'm hoping everyone can see the results of the poll. Can you?
I can see them.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, great. Thank you. So it looks like there's a lot of people that think that's a good definition, like 100%. And most people think they've seen a very similar definition. And then in terms of how many people are familiar with the Complete and Green Streets Policy and Guide, it looks like there's some people think they have and some people think they haven't. So hopefully by the end, everybody will be able to answer that question. So for those of you who don't know me, as Megan said, I'm Ann Heasley, Program Manager for Policy and Planning at Sustainable Jersey. And I really want to thank you for joining us today. And a special shout out and thanks to those of you that responded to my quick Google form questionnaire. It really helped us focus the information that we're going to share today. And to do that, we have two excellent speakers. We're going to start out with Leanne Von Hagen, Senior Researcher and Adjunct Professor with the Voorhees Transportation Center at the Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers. And many of you know her because she developed our Sustainable Jersey Complete Streets Action, and she has been the reviewer. And so many of you have talked to her in that role. She's also instrumental in development of the new Complete and Green Streets Policy for All, which we'll be discussing today. And then another person that was instrumental in that policy development is our second speaker, Candace Perry. And Candace is the Director of Stormwater at New Jersey Future and a state leader in promoting the use of green infrastructure to manage stormwater and how, green streets can really provide multiple benefits. And she also can answer other questions that you have about stormwater and stormwater utilities, stormwater ordinances. So a big thank you to Leanne and Candace for helping us out today. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and ask Leanne to go ahead and share hers.
And I'll remember to unmute myself too. All right, give me 1 second to get it set up. There we go. I think that worked. Does that look good, Ann? All right, thumbs up, good. Hi, everybody, welcome. I'm so glad I recognize several names of people who are attending today. And if I don't recognize you and you've heard from me, maybe by email, now maybe you can put a face to the name. I hope you don't throw darts at some of my times when I've had to say, no, it didn't quite pass the policy for say sustainable Jersey points. But I hope by the end of this presentation, you will feel more comfortable moving forward with our updated sustainable Jersey, both for the complete and green streets and another new action that I'm going to be talking about. And so for those who don't know me, I manage 2 resource centers at Rutgers University, the Safe Routes Resource Center and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, which are both funded by the Department of Transportation at our state. So basically, by the end of this presentation, I hope you walk away with some tips and strategies for applying for these sustainable Jersey points for the Complete and Green Streets action and the new bicycle and or pedestrian improvement action. So let's hit it. And I'm so glad that so many people recognize that complete streets definition or have heard of complete streets. Because I do always try and start with a slide to say, if you're not familiar, the idea behind complete streets is that whether you're a municipality or county or other or a state, you adopt a policy that requires road engineering and design projects to consider the mobility needs of everyone, all roadway users, for all modes of travel, for which includes people walking, bicycling, transit users of all ages and abilities. So we're not talking about road design that is solely about moving cars and trucks as fast as possible through communities. It's more about what's happening in our communities. And in many ways, New Jersey is already a success story for complete streets policy. The New Jersey Department of Transportation adopted a statewide complete streets policy in 2009. So in the last 10 plus years, we've seen 169 towns and 8 counties pass their own complete streets policies. So this should mean we're making some dramatic progress towards making roads safer for people who walk and bike. I would hope so. Sadly, our fatality numbers don't necessarily make that case. It's not a direct correlation, but in the past few years, 34% of all motor vehicle involved fatalities were people on foot or by bicycle, which is twice the national average, which makes New Jersey a federally designated pedestrian and bicycle focused state. And I think that brings us to our first poll, Anne. So, and the poll is, does your municipality have a complete streets policy? And do you think it's important to consider equity in transportation funding decisions? So how long are we giving people to answer?
Well, it looks like we got 15 responses. And it looks like that might be where it stops. So we'll just, oh, one more got in there. Another second. Oh, now we're, okay, here we go. Share results. Can you see those? No.
There it is.
Okay, great.
Oh, okay. So 55% with yes, they have a complete streets policy, and yes, considering equity in transportation and funding decisions. Great. That's a great response. Okay. There we go. All right. So one thing I want to tell you about is at a statewide level every month, an informal group of people representing organizations interested in discussing pressing issues, partnering and growing better, safer, more equitable streets in New Jersey. We meet to coordinate efforts working with towns and counties in New Jersey to adopt complete streets policy. It's a once a month meeting where groups like Bicycle and Pedestrian Advocates, AARP, American Heart Association, and water quality professionals meet and discuss issues and successes. A few years ago, it became clear that towns were interested in adopting policy, but the quality of the policy content was a bit all over the place. And it kind of left our group asking ourselves, what also happened to implementation? We have 169 policies, but sometimes it seems like the implementation piece of the puzzle isn't there. One of the other things we talked about in our group often is the transportation decision-making includes many areas outside of traditional transportation topics, such as public health, stormwater management, or green streets, as we like to call them, or economic impacts, or equity. Yet a lot of our policies were not acknowledging those connections. We also acknowledge the need to encourage stronger policy adoption. The way I like to explain it is there are resolutions, which are an official statement of support using the typical whereas type statements. There's policy, which is the process and actions designed to ensure that complete streets are routinely considered in all transportation decisions. These can include things like checklists that are attached to the resolutions. However, the gold standard is often adopting an ordinance, which is law that can be enforced and becomes part of a searchable record of municipal laws. So what was resulted from this conversation a few years ago was a new guide. It was at least 2 years in the making and does propel New Jersey into the next decade of working to make our streets accessible for all modes of transportation for all ages and abilities. We created this guide that gives a model language for resolutions, policies to better address implementation and ways to adopt ordinances. So I'm going to walk you through a few of the highlights from this model policy just to give you a flavor. So let's start with public health. We work closely with our health partners like American Heart Association on health language. And so, for example, our public health and safety policy reads, whereas complete streets encourage an active lifestyle through increased physical activity, social connectivity, and a sense of community belonging, thereby lowering the risk of obesity, reducing chronic disease, improving mental health, and promoting wellness. And whereas traffic crashes are preventable and the only acceptable number of traffic deaths in my own town is 0. Next up, let's talk a little bit about green streets, but Candace is going to get a lot more into that. So here's some of our model language. Whereas complete streets that incorporate sustainable green street design elements such as green stormwater infrastructure, traffic calming treatments, shade trees, and the use of recycled materials protect and create a healthier, natural, and social environment, improve air quality and water quality, and reduce localized flooding. Okay, and a little bit about equity. And to be honest, the language around this topic took us almost a year alone, but here's what we came up with. Some of this language is actually lifted from our governor's executive order on environmental justice communities. So, whereas low and moderate income areas, whether in rural, urban, or suburban communities, are typically the least safe for pedestrians and bicyclists, especially for children walking and bicycling to school, due to long-standing infrastructure disparities and higher concentration of streets with faster moving and higher volume traffic. And whereas procedures should be implemented to ensure fair treatment, equitable funding, and resource distribution, and meaningful involvement of all communities in all phases from selection, planning, and design to construction and long-term maintenance. So I'm going to pause here on equity for a minute to just talk to you about an example. So we many years ago did a project on State Route 130 that splits the city of Burlington into two. Not only that, but it has a large median in the middle that houses commercial destinations like a Jersey diner, a McDonald's, and a Wawa. So you can see there is a middle school and a high school also located on this state road. These safety issues alone are cause for concern, but I would like to show you a little deeper look. When we look at the city of Burlington, we have a census tract to the south of Route 130 and just to the north of Route 130, another census tract, same city, but the circumstances are different. In the orange, there's a median household income of around $58,000, an 8% unemployment rate, and 10% of people living in poverty. In the blue is a median household income of about $73,000, a 7% unemployment rate, and about 4 people living in poverty. This is the same city, different circumstances depending on where you live. And I give this illustration not because it's unique or rare or picking on Burlington City by far. It's actually pretty common when we do look at these kind of demographics in almost any town. However, a lot of times when we do see complete streets projects, they're not in the section of town which experiences the worst social and economic burdens. All right, back to our model policy. Our model policy also continues with guidance on putting the policy into action. For the policy section, we recommend a few things and provide model language about establishing a complete streets advisory body as oversight to comply with the policy and provide ongoing feedback about implementation. We include recommended broad group of stakeholders that include community members representing persons with disabilities, seniors, youth organizations, and persons representing what we call priority communities. And we use the term priority communities to refer to a category of underserved and adversely impacted populations. The definition of priority communities in this model policy is minority concentrations, low income concentrations, and some other indicators of disadvantage like persons with limited English proficiency, elderly population, children, and persons with disabilities. In the policy, we also recommend municipalities work to ensure the consistency with inclusion to include complete streets in master plans or other comprehensive elements. And we also include benchmarks for evaluating progress. So the benchmarks can include things like miles of new bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, including in priority communities, number of new street trees and green street practices, the number and location and causes of collisions and injuries and fatalities, and the percentage of children walking and bicycling to school. And finally, many of our towns do adopt complete streets checklist, and they used based on a checklist that was adopted in the Department of Transportation, the State Department of Transportation's Complete Streets Policy, which is a good checklist. But what we did when we took a look at this new model language is we took another look through the checklist and we enhanced DOT's checklist to include green streets, equity considerations, and created a new checklist on maintenance. So that's a quick overview. Prior to this year, there were 2 Sustainable Jersey actions for complete streets, and both of those are now retired. So we combined those 2 actions into one and updated it to include the new DOT model policy. The new Complete and Green Streets for All action has a variable points that gives you more points for the more that you do. The new action adopts the language of the model policy and has health, equity, and green streets as part of each tier. In addition, we rolled out a new action that gives you points for implementation, the bicycle and/or pedestrian improvement action. So first, I'm going to walk you through complete and green streets, and then we'll go into bicycle and pedestrian improvements. So municipalities interested in adopting a modified complete and green streets for all policy through a resolution or ordinance can earn up to 30 points. Sustainable Jersey has broken the New Jersey DOT model policy into 3 tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3, and provide model policy for adoption for each tier. This might sound a little complicated. I am going to walk you through it. So hopefully you recognize this as the Sustainable Jersey Actions page on their website. Scrolling down to Land Use and Transportation, look for Complete and Green Streets for All. And if you're like me, you go, once you have that open, right to what to submit as part of the action to see what you need to do. And what's good is that is embedded into that what to submit is a worksheet we created to walk you through each tier. So you'll go to what to submit and open this worksheet. In the worksheet, we included all the resources for each tier. So again, once you're in the worksheet, you'll see there's things like the model policy languages that are linked to the worksheet, and you can see exactly what the model policy language is for that tier. And what's nice is we provided it in a Word document, easy to just download, cut and paste whatever you need to do. Also in this worksheet, if you scroll down more past each tier, you will find what we're asking you to do is, in order to make sure you have all the pieces together to submit for points, you will scroll down to what's called our tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 action submission worksheet. And again, it's another Word document, and it provides, depending on what tier you're going to apply for, a small little checklist so that you know that you've submitted everything to get all the points. So here's an example. For the tier 1, which we call Adopt a Good Complete and Green Streets Policy, the municipality adopts a complete and green streets policy that includes some of the basic components of the new Department of Transportation model policy. A signed copy of the full policy would be uploaded along with this worksheet. And approved tier 1 policies will receive 10 points if adopted by resolution or 15 points if adopted by ordinance. For tier 2, adopt a better complete and green streets policy. The municipality adopts a complete and green streets policy that includes all of the requirements of tier 1 as well as project checklists. the formation of an advisory committee, and a public participation process. A signed copy of the full policy would be uploaded along with this worksheet. So approved Tier 2 policies will receive 20 points by resolution or 25 points by ordinance. And this is go for the gold. So Tier 3, adopt the best complete and green streets policy. The municipality adopts the complete and green streets policy that includes all of the components of the New Jersey DOT model policy. This policy requires the municipality to establish benchmarks and track progress in meeting these goals through data collection. So again, a signed copy of the policy would be uploaded along with this Tier 3 worksheet, and approved Tier 3 will receive 25 points by resolution or 30 points by ordinance. Okay, so what if you already have a complete streets policy in your town? We know 169 towns already have one, and you just need to maybe tweak that policy to add in things like green streets or equity in order to get the next level of complete streets points. So we have a worksheet for you for there too. So if you're interested in updating your policy, there's yet this other worksheet when you go into the main what to submit section that walks you through what language you probably already have that's good and where you may need to add in new language to now meet the new requirements for the Sustainable Jersey action. So again, I know there was a lot, but we are here to help, as customer service likes to say. At Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers, we offer a pre-policy adoption review. So once you have a draft policy, we would like you to go ahead and email it to us at srts@ejb.rutgers.edu, and my staff or myself will review it using those checklists to make sure it meets the Sustainable Jersey points for the tier you desire. That way you get us to look over it before you take it to the board to adopt, because it breaks my heart to have to tell a town that I wasn't able to award you Sustainable Jersey points after you've already went through the hardship of adopting the policy or resolution. So we would like to see it first. And the only thing I request is please don't send it to us with like a day to review. We do need some time. We don't always have staff that can drop everything and look at your policy. So give us some time to look it over. If you're planning to bring it to your municipal body to adopt in, say, July, please give us like over a month would be nice. Several weeks would be great. And let us know your deadlines so that we can do our best to help you and call you with questions if we need to follow up. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is a bicycle and pedestrian improvement projects action, which is to encourage municipalities to install infrastructure improvements, both temporary and permanent, that could benefit people on foot or by bike. So again, this is a tiered policy. Tier 1 is for short-term improvements and are eligible for 10 points. Tier 2 is for permanent improvements and are eligible for 20 points. And there's a bonus 5 points if you can show us that either in Tier 1 or Tier 2, you did prioritize those priority communities for improvements. So back to the Sustainable Jersey action page. Again, scroll down to land use and transportation, look for the bicycle and pedestrian improvement projects action. And like me, you'll go right to what to submit for action. And again, there, we created another template or worksheet to walk you through each tier. Again, and it's in Word, so you can take a quick look. Okay. So quickly on this, if your municipality has already adopted Complete and Green Streets Actions checklist, you can just submit those checklists. So we're trying to make it easy and tie back to Complete and Green Streets. So if you have those checklists for concept development, preliminary engineering, or construction, submit us your checklist and we'll use that to assess points. If you have not adopted those checklists, then you can use this worksheet, which asks you a few questions about what kind of project it is and whether it was short-term or long-term. It also will ask you about priority communities. You may be asking, how do I know if I have a priority community or where my priority communities are? So I just want to take a minute to show you this great new resource just debuted this spring at DEP's website for their environmental justice mapping tool. So for this tool, it's actually very easy to use. You can search for the municipality that you want to find your priority communities in. It zooms you into the exact spot so you can see the legend and the different designations of overburdened community. And what's neat about this is you can also choose the right kind of base map. So if this is sort of the Google style map, but you actually want to zoom in on something that's more like an aerial photo, they've got all these different backgrounds you can use. It's pretty super. Okay, this is a handout we have, and added handouts to this session. So please look for our handout if you need to find the model policy. I do want to say congratulations to all of our early adopters who did adopt the full model policy, including one town, Eatontown, that adopted the full model policy as an ordinance and has been using it with great success. And if you want to hear about Eatontown's great success, I'm going to suggest you come to yet another Zoom, which is our Safe Routes Academy, which is June 1st through 5th. We have Eatontown talking about their ordinance. They adopted the Complete and Green Streets Ordinance on Thursday, June 3rd from 4 to 5 p.m. as part of our Safe Routes Academy this year. So you can register for that at njbwc.org. And I'd love to see you again if you want to follow up and hear more about it. One last thing, we do run a Safe Routes recognition program. We tie our recognition program to Sustainable Jersey points. For example, if you are silver level Safe Routes action, you get into our recognition program as well. So we do tie closely to Sustainable Jersey for all our recognition levels, including for Sustainable Jersey for schools. So if you want more information, please let me know. And this is my contact information. So I have myself and some staff at the Safe Routes Resource Center, and just reach out to us if you have any questions about anything I presented today. And that's it. Thank you.
So I think we have one more poll that we're going to launch right here, Megan. And we can transition between Leanne and Candace. Sharing screen. Oh. Okay, I think we're going to end the poll. I think oops, hoping you can see the results. Looks like there are people that know where there's some green streets where they live, and some people are not sure. So maybe by the end they'll know. So all right, Candace, I think we're ready.
Great, sounds good. Let me just say before I get started that I'm always looking to learn where green streets are located. So if you want to put them in the chat, if you know like where your town, if your town does have green streets, throw it in the chat, and I would love to follow up with you afterwards to get some pictures maybe. But yeah, so we're going to segue into talking into more detail about Complete and Green, the green component of Complete and Green Streets, designing streets for people and stormwater. So some of you may be familiar and others of you may not. So I'm hoping that from this presentation, you will learn some new things. But for those of you who maybe are already familiar with what green infrastructure is, maybe you'll leave the presentation with some new tips and tricks and ideas for how to further green infrastructure and green streets in your municipality. So before we dive in, let me just give you a little bit of background on the organization that I work for, which is called New Jersey Future. We are a statewide nonprofit based in Trenton, New Jersey, where we do our work around creating great and healthy places for New Jersey's residents and visitors to live, work, and play. We envision communities to have safe streets that are clean and safe streets and clean waterways that are free from flooding and pollution. We do our work around a few programmatic areas, including housing and transportation and water. So what I work on at New Jersey Future is at the nexus between transportation and water. Okay, so let's first just take a look at this example. This is a typical street that you would see in the US. This is actually in New York City. So you can see that there is a bike lane at the right-hand side of the screen, which is good, but the striping on the street is faded and can probably use some upgrades. There's some wear and tear here on the street. So this is fine and probably something living on the Northeast that many of you are familiar with, right? So this is what I would like to say, a street that is primarily designed for cars. So let's look at this next example. So instead of having that bike lane on the right, you now have it in the center and it's protected. So this is what a lot of complete streets advocates would be advocating for, is that you put the bike lane towards the center and away from oncoming traffic to give some safety and protection to the cyclists and the pedestrians that need to cross the street, and can just use this center island area as a way to rest, maybe tie your shoes, maybe just sit on the bench and enjoy the day. So this is a street that I like to call a street that is designed for cars and for people. It's designed with people in mind. So this is a way to complete the street. Okay, but this is what I'd like to call the gold standard of complete streets, because it incorporates complete and green streets. So again, here in this scenario, you have the bike lane that's moved into the center. So you have that protection for cyclists. You have also a park area, so people are able to sit outside, enjoy the day, eat their lunch. But you also have all of this greenery, which is different from the last two examples. So the greenery here provides shade. It provides a nice environment to just, be out in nature, but it also manages a lot of stormwater. So this is what I like to call a street that is designed for cars and people, but also with water in mind. And just a couple of pictures here to show you that this is a real street. The last picture is a rendering, but this is how it actually looks. This is probably taken in the fall, so the greenery is not as vibrant as it would be in the spring, but this is also what it looks like. Okay, so let's talk about what exactly is a green street. So a green street is where green infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure practices are located within the public right-of-way. So you're using green infrastructure to manage stormwater and prevent flooding. As compared to traditional streets, which you might think of as with gray infrastructure, where you are having pipes and gutters and drains that are conveying stormwater into the gutter instead of allowing it to infiltrate into green practices. Okay, so let's talk a little bit further about what exactly is green infrastructure if you're not familiar with that term. So green infrastructure basically is an approach to managing stormwater that allows stormwater to infiltrate into the ground where it falls, providing shade, increasing groundwater levels that I kind of talked about earlier on the environmental side, but also on the economic side. Green infrastructure can be cost neutral or even cost less as compared to gray infrastructure. So there can be cost savings there. There can be energy cost savings, maintenance cost savings, and green infrastructure in terms of green jobs can be a jobs creator. Also, there are societal benefits of being out in nature, being out around green spaces, public health and mental health benefits. And as we've been talking about, complete and green streets can aid in safer neighborhoods and slower and safer streets. And also, streets equal a large percentage of a municipality's impervious cover. So if you're looking for ways or places within your municipality to reduce impervious cover and thereby reduce stormwater runoff and stormwater pollution, And flooding, you should be looking at opportunities to install green infrastructure within the streetscape, because where is there a lot of impervious cover? Our streets. So it's a great opportunity. So let's talk about opportunities and how you identify, like where would you put green streets in your community? So you want to be looking for new streets, obviously. If you're developing a new street, that's a perfect opportunity to think about how green infrastructure can be included and implemented within that new street. Now, in a state like New Jersey, we aren't building a lot of new streets. We're typically retrofitting or redeveloping the street in some way. So that's also an opportunity when the street is being retrofitted to think about how green infrastructure can make good sense for that project. And then in terms of project, your municipal capital plan. So if you are representing a municipality, you may want to talk to the decision makers that are involved in capital planning and just thinking through what are some of the major street retrofits that are coming down the pike in 2 to 5 to 10 years, and create a plan for how green infrastructure can be in that conversation. So you also want to look for excess width within the sidewalk. In some communities, we have very wide sidewalks that could afford green infrastructure practice and still have enough width for your pedestrians walking down the street. Also, some municipalities have a tree replacement plan. So trees don't live forever, they're living systems, and sometimes they need to be replaced because they can become hazardous. As those trees need to be replaced, think about replacing that tree with, instead of a typical shade tree, a tree that captures a lot of stormwater. Okay, so let's take a look at a few examples in New Jersey of where green streets are located. So we're going to start in Camden. So this is a typical traffic triangle in the middle of the street. You could see this anywhere, right? And so this is how that same traffic island would look with green infrastructure. And the telltale sign is, you can see here that the curb is cut, and it's cut so that it's at grade level with the street. So this will allow stormwater to flow from the street into this island that's now been turned into a rain garden. So as this matures and the plants grow, it'll look just like a garden, but it's actually capturing a lot of stormwater. Here's another example of a sidewalk in a residential neighborhood. And here it is during construction. And then here's that same street after it's been converted to a permeable sidewalk. So you could be walking down this street and not even notice that this is green infrastructure. And that's actually one of the benefits of green infrastructure, is that it can just blend into the current character of your neighborhood. You don't actually have to know that anything is happening different. But with this permeable pavement, again, stormwater can soak into the sidewalk and not run off. So here's just like a Google Maps version of the same street, kind of planted with a couple of trees, so it looks nice. Here's an example in Milburn. This is along their main street, a really nice planted area that again has this curb cut, allowing for stormwater to run from the street into this island. Here's the same shot in Milburn, just kind of a different angle. Okay, and I also want to talk about in Hoboken. Hoboken has been doing a really great job incorporating green streets into their transportation thinking and conversation. So Washington Street in Hoboken has been a long plan in the making to add or incorporate green streets into Washington Street, which is their main street. This is a picture that's under construction. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture that shows the green street completed, but I do have this hyperlinked in my slides, which will take you to a video in Hoboken that talks about the Washington Street project, and you can see how it looks completed. Okay, so let's end with a few takeaways. Let me go back one. Okay, so first you want to leverage the private sector to build green infrastructure in exchange for incentives. If any of you are on the call, are on the planning board, for example, or on city council, you have the authority within municipal government to be requesting of developers that they build and incorporate things that your municipal government wants to see in projects into their development applications. So you can have conversations with that developer about green infrastructure and think about ways to leverage those conversations with incentives for that developer. Next, green streets helps to reduce flooding and it aids in traffic calming and pedestrian safety like we've been talking about. You want to plan green streets in tandem with other street retrofit projects. I talked about this earlier, and this is a really strong way to reduce costs. So if you have a utility, let's say an electric utility that is ripping up the street to repair a gas line, for example, that might be an opportunity to have a conversation, the municipal government, with that utility about combining, since the street will be ripped open anyway, how about we think about including green infrastructure into that project? And there are ways to install green infrastructure in tandem with utilities. You just need an engineer who is familiar with that type of work, but it is possible. Next, complete streets policies and ordinance help to institutionalize green streets beyond resolutions and beyond one administration. I think this is really important because you can have an administration that is really supportive of sustainability, environmental topics, and green streets. But then once the administration changes over, maybe there's not as much interest in complete and green streets. So we really do want to institutionalize all of this good thinking into policies and ideally an ordinance so that complete and green streets is just the way that your municipal government thinks about creating great places for your residents through its transportation network. And green streets can earn you sustainable Jersey points. This is why we're all here to talk about that. I do want to mention that in addition to the actions that Leanne just told you about, there's also the green infrastructure planning and green infrastructure implementation sustainable Jersey actions. So if you're doing complete and green streets projects that has, of course, green infrastructure into your complete street, you can also qualify for points for two other actions, the green infrastructure planning and green infrastructure implementation. So a great way to kind of build the momentum and the test case for decision makers in your town. If you can also say, hey, we can get points for these other two actions as well. And lastly, complete and green streets is really the takeaway here. To have a truly completed street, you would also be thinking about ways that that street can sustainably manage stormwater. Oh, and I have a last bullet here. We also want to think about ways to fund green streets through DOT's local aid grants. So DOT has money that can fund green streets, complete and green streets projects. And you can get points for if your municipality has a complete and green streets policy, for example, towards your application. So here are some additional resources that you might want to check out. I just want to end on the Green Infrastructure Municipal Toolkit. This is a resource through New Jersey Future, which is an online one-stop kind of website that takes you through green infrastructure planning, implementation, and maintenance, and will help you to think about how to better implement and maintain green infrastructure in your municipality. So if you have questions, I definitely encourage you to check out the toolkit. It should be a helpful resource for you. And that's what I have for today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share a couple more slides. So I think we might have one more poll question, but actually we don't even have to launch the poll. As Candace mentioned, if you have any examples of green streets near you, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And there were some great questions in the chat, so we will definitely go back to those. And before that, we sort of close out the presentation and start the conversation, I just want to take a minute to thank the Sustainable Jersey 2021 Summit sponsors. Without their support, we couldn't do the work that we do, and we really want to thank them. And then I just want to highlight to people that there's still opportunities to join the summit. Really glad that you're here today. But I do want to highlight that there's a couple of sessions tomorrow that I think, you know, if you're interested in complete streets, you're interested in health, and there's a session tomorrow on the new Gold Star standard in health. You know, giving an overview of that star, which we hope to launch in over the summer. And then I just want to give a quick recognition to a movie night. You know, the idea was that you watch a 45-minute movie and join the discussion. I just want to let you know that you don't have to watch the movie to really get a lot out of this session. We've got some great speakers to talk about regenerative farming. If you're interested in stormwater and how water, you know, how to capture water in agriculture and the importance of different kinds of agricultural techniques in stormwater, it's going to be a really great session, panel discussion with some Rutgers scientists as well as farmers in New Jersey that are using those practices. So just want to encourage you to join both those sessions. And before we open it up for questions, I just want to give a round of applause to our two speakers for really thought-provoking and informative session here. And I guess we'll go ahead and stop sharing and get all our smiling faces. And I'll go back to some of the questions. There were some questions on maintenance, Candace, which I'm sure you were expecting, because there's always questions about green infrastructure and maintenance. We don't often ask that about gray infrastructure, but it definitely comes up in green infrastructure. And so two sort of questions about that, like, are there any studies that show that green infrastructure, you know, lessens in its ability to handle pollutants and things like that over time? And then also permeable surfaces and their maintenance over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maintenance is definitely a question I get pretty often. So for vegetated types of green infrastructure practices, yes, depending on the type of plant species you choose and the soil mix that you choose, you can definitely be removing a lot of pollutants from entering bodies of water. So it just depends on the soil mix, the ratio, and the plant species. But that is the point, is to improve the quality of water through the root system of the plants and the mix of the soil. For permeable pavement, the maintenance that you would use there is probably once or twice a year, you would get a vacuum and just vacuum, literally sucking out all of the grit that is clogging the pores within the porous pavement. There are some installations of porous or permeable pavement, you can use those two words interchangeably, that haven't been vacuumed or maintained for a few years. So it just kind of depends on, again, the type of porous pavement mix that you're using. There's different brands on the market. So it depends on the product that you choose, but just the vacuum maybe once or twice a year and then you're done.
And also just a point of clarification when you were talking about like putting in street trees, I think you said maybe different kinds of trees that absorb water. And I sort of clarified in the chat that I think you were really talking about the tree pit itself.
Yeah,
like
I saw that.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just clarify. Thanks for stepping in. And so there are trees, right? Trees that you typically see in the sidewalk that are just regular trees. Then you can have what's called a stormwater tree pit, where beneath the surface, there's a bigger volume. So you would dig a hole to plant a tree. The green infrastructure side of it is you would dig a bigger hole and you have layers of rock and gravel and sand that will aid in the infiltration of stormwater. So you have a bigger footprint for that tree. So all trees will capture stormwater. It's just the amount and the volume of stormwater that you're wanting to capture, which will entail like how big of the footprint and also the engineering that happens underneath the surface.
Okay, great. And then let's see, Leanne, you answered a question from Jack, but I can't actually find his question. I don't know if either you or Jack want to speak up about.
Well, it was really specific about chip seal, and I answered the question and I remembered one of my colleagues would probably have my head for not mentioning that there is some videos on pavement management on DOT's website, which I almost never remember about because pavement management is not my gig, and don't think about it very often. But chip seal is sort of a type of application. It helps preserve pavement. It's much lower cost than repaving the whole roadway, but it comes with a whole host of other problems. So it's economically beneficial for municipal and county and state budgets, but it's problematic, like especially if it's freshly done, especially if you find yourself on a bicycle through chip seal, freshly done, it'll be really, it's not fun. It's pretty uncomfortable. So it is a whole discipline. I was just remembering that there's this whole pavement preservation part of New Jersey Department of Transportation's technology transfer. I'll put it in the link, Jack. But this might be a better offline topic because, it's one of those stories that, yes, there are growing technology advances and alternatives to it. I really don't know where the state is in really considering them, though.
Okay, so I did, we're going to wrap things up here. I will send out to all the participants today a document that links all the resources that our speakers talked about today. I've put it in the chat, but I think people can't quite get it there. So we'll go ahead and send that out to everyone. And you'll get an email from me. And if there's some questions that we didn't get to address, please feel free to email me, and then I'll either see if I can answer it or send it out to Candace or Leanne. Unfortunately, we have to wrap this up because we have another session right after this, but I do, again, want to thank our speakers and thank you for joining us today and your interest in complete and green streets. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks to you, Ann.
Thank you, everyone.